Good afternoon and welcome to the Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization Governing Board on this beautiful day on the Space Coast, July 12, 2018. Let's join me in doing the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's take a moment of silence for Mr. Bob Comm. 1 minute. Thank you. It's a great honor, great picture of Mr. Comm. Very nice. Item 3, public comments. If you wish to comment on an agenda item, please fill out a speaker card, and when that time comes, you'll be able to have your 3 minutes. So thank you. Going into item 4, reports from the committee. A is Technical Advisory Committee, the TAC, and Citizens Advisory Committee, CAC report. Georgiana.
Yes, the Technical and Citizen Advisory Committee met on Monday. At your place, you'll find a summary of actions and the attendance from the meeting. The TAC-CAC recommend the TPO approve the minutes from the May 7th, 2018 meeting, the fiscal year 2019 Strategic Intermodal System Project Priorities, Resolution 19-01, adoption of the fiscal year 19 through 23 Transportation Improvement Program, and Work Order 1906K, the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan Scope of Services.
Thank you, Georgiana. Any questions? Seeing none, I need a motion for approval.
Motion to approve. Second.
All right, I have a motion by Mr. Price, second by Mr. Holton. Discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, and I vote aye, and the motion passes. Item 4B is the Bicycle Pedestrian Trails Advisory Committee, the BPTAC report. Sarah Crum.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Crum. I'm the Multimodal Program Specialist for the Space Coast TPO. Attached are the draft meetings for the BPAC meeting on May 21st. During that meeting, we recognized committee members for their service and attendance, similar to what we did at the board and other committees as well. We also reviewed the new bike ped trail projects that were submitted during our project prioritization or project priority time, and then they reviewed the project prioritization of those and approved both the regional trails and the transportation alternatives list with some minor changes. Those are noted in the minutes, as well as also will come before this board in September. Paul Haight of the East Coast Greenway Alliance provided an update to the committee as well. I'd also like to announce and congratulate the city of Titusville for being the second ever Florida town designated as a Florida Trail Town. So great job up there.
Congratulations.
Oh, there you are. Yep. Yep. Great job up there.
All
and
right.
Just great. Both, D1 and Titusville just are doing excellent work up there with trails, so thank you guys. I also wanted to give a brief update on our bicycle pedestrian master plan update. It is well underway. We had 14 targeted stakeholder interviews, as well as also we are having our first steering committee meeting coming up next week. And the steering committee is made up of staff representatives from all of the municipalities in Brevard County, Space Coast Area Transit, Office of Greenways and Trails, public schools. Everyone will have the opportunity to sit on that committee and weigh in, as well as also there'll be public meetings in all of your areas. So,
very good.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crum. Item 4C, Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board, the TDL-CB report, and that will be Terry Jordan.
Sarah, I don't see Terry. Is he not coming this afternoon?
He was supposed to be here, but I can do that.
Okay.
Is he on the third floor?
Terry? Oh, maybe, maybe the time change or something. That's
Yep.
perfectly understandable.
We did.
The TDLCB met last month. As you guys may not be aware, the Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board is basically in charge of approving various transportation disadvantaged grants for our paratransit system and such. So we did approve that same planning grant that came in front of you guys, I believe in May, as well as we had our new chair introduce himself, Rocky Randalls. So we were very excited to have our new chair. And so we reviewed basically the planning grant, and then SCAT provided an update on their numbers and such to us. So.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Crum.
All right.
And congratulations, Mr. Randalls. Item Item 5, consent agenda. Georgiana.
Yes, there are 3 items on the consent agenda. 5A is the approval of the minutes from May 10th TPO board meeting. 5B is the new committee appointment to the CAC by the City of Titusville. And then 5C is finance and budget. It's the second quarterly report from January to March of this year. So the consent agenda can be passed as one motion.
All right. Thank you, Georgiana. Any questions on that? Seeing none, I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have a motion by Ms. Moore to approve the consent agenda items A through C, and second by Mr. Osmer, I'm sorry. Discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And I vote aye, and the motion passes. Item 6A, we're into action reports, approval of the 2019 Strategic Intermodal System, the SIS, project priorities. Ms. Georgiana.
Yes, this one's mine as well. Each July, we adopt our strategic intermodal system project priorities. The district takes our SIS priority list, and they work with central office to get projects funded in the SIS cost feasible plan, which is really the long-range plan for SIS projects, and subsequently funding in the DOT 5-year work program. So the SIS is Florida's high-priority network of transportation facilities. It's very important to the state's economy and mobility. It's the biggest capacity investment with around 75% funding from the Transportation Trust Fund going to the SIS. So these facilities are usually tied to freight. Freight movement is the economy in motion. And so for Brevard, these facilities really form the backbone of the economy. So our SIS corridors, of course, are I-95 and the Beach Line. Those are the 2 SIS corridors. Then, of course, we have transportation hubs, the Spaceport, Port Canaveral, the Orlando Melbourne International Airport, and the connectors that link the hubs and the corridors. They all qualify for SIS funding. So on page 31 is the highway component, and I just kind of wanted to update you on this particular list. Starting with number 1, the Ellis Road widening. This is our number 1 priority, and it's also the number 1 priority on the regional SIS list. This is Ellis Road will be the new I-95, and the new I-95 interchange will be the new designated SIS route when it becomes operational. So the county is under design for this project. The north interchange at Ellis has been advertised, so construction is expected to begin around September of this year. And the county will be advertising the portion of the parkway from 192 up to the new interchange a little later this year. So the projects are really starting to come together as far as the parkway is concerned. We have right-of-way funded over a 4-year period. The first year begins in fiscal year 21. The good news is that the right-of-way impacts are going to be significantly reduced. And so some of the funding that we have set aside for right-of-way can be converted to construction. So we may not have to get a SIB loan, which is one of the things that we have talked about in the past. So I think the project is finally starting to move forward in a very positive way. Number 2 is the I-95 interchanges. Basically, as improvements are identified either through the SIS connector study or safety improvements, they can be programmed as quick fixes. And for instance, 405 and State Road 50 in Titusville, there's turn lane improvements there. 405 in Sisson, that is a SIS connector, and they were put into the work program a couple of years ago. I-95 in Wickham and I-95 in Gallie are turn lane improvements that have just been added to the work program. So this is really a kind of a catch-all, and they can be done very quickly with SIS funding. And of course, 3A and 3B, that is the beach line widening projects. These are the big projects that we have under design for the District 5 portion, basically from Industry to the Port Canaveral interchange. There is right-of-way funding programmed in fiscal year 2024, so that's coming up pretty soon, and there's a public meeting scheduled for January or February of next year. So those projects are moving forward. Number 4, this is the NASA Causeway Bridge replacement. The project has just been included in the SIS cost feasible plan, which is good. The PD&E is underway by the DOT, and the NASA is working very closely with the department to also get them to move into the design phase. And they are securing the funding for the department to move into the design phase. And the project manager said the project is kind of on steroids. It is moving very quickly because they need to have a firm estimate by the beginning of next year so we can set ourselves up for an infra grant. So I think the project is really moving forward and is back on track. And then number 5 is the 401 bridge replacements, is the 3 bascule bridges out at the port. We do have a letter that the port received from Secretary Dew that the PD&E will be funded in fiscal year 2019, which is excellent. I have not seen it in the work program yet, but work program just opened up in July, and so we are hopeful that that project can move forward. As and it takes a long time to get these projects going, and so the sooner the better. Number 6 is a new project that we've added to the SIS list I want to bring to your attention. It's Pineda, the Pineda Causeway, and it's for a new westbound off-ramp at South Patrick Drive. Pineda is a military access facility, so it qualifies for SIS funding as well. If you're on Pineda and you're traveling east, you can get off at South Patrick to access the South Gate, but if you're traveling west, you cannot. Mm-hmm. And so what's happening is a lot of military personnel are accessing the South Gate through the neighborhoods of South Patrick, and it's creating quite a log jam. And so this is another project that the department feels like can be a quick fix, but it is contingent on the Air Force Base pushing back their gate to the north because they have to have the additional stacking onto the Pineda. So we'll be working closely with them on this project. And then, of course, number 7 is Space Commerce Way. It's been on our list for a while. This is a Space Florida project. There's a traffic study underway related to creating a primary entrance on Space Commerce Way. And there's also an environmental assessment that's underway. So those projects are moving forward. And then I just want to mention, if you turn to the other SIS modes, we have a rail section as well as the Canaveral Port Authority section. And then we also, on page 5 of 6, is the Space Florida priorities. And of course, the port and Space Florida work directly with the DOT Freight and Logistics Office, but we want to show support and continuity of these SIS projects, so we want to include them in our SIS priority list. And then finally, the last page, Space Coast Area Transit. This is on page 36 of your agenda package. This is new. We have quarterly meetings with Space Coast Area Transit to discuss how we can help each other. We assist them with studies as needed, but this was really a way for them to identify their top 10 or 15 priorities, and just to elevate them. They're not necessarily asking for money from the TPO, other than assisting them with studies, but it is a way to elevate that these are projects that are really important to them. Some of these projects came out of their transit development plan, and we thought this was really a good way of highlighting those projects. So these are our proposed 2019 SIS priorities, and we are asking for your adoption.
Okay, thank you, Georgiana. Any questions for Georgiana? Seeing none, I need a motion for approval. All right.
Second by Randalls.
All right, I have a motion for approval by Mr. Allender, second by Mr. Randalls. Discussion? Seeing none. Those in favor, say aye. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to make a comment. Thank you for
Okay.
Ellis Road. Thank you for making that priority one, because, it's
Yes.
in my city, so I'm very thankful. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Melbourne too, and the county, right? So, yes. All right. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, and I vote aye, and the motion passes. Item 6B is approval of the Resolution 1901, adoption of the fiscal year 2019 to 2023 Transportation Improvement Plan, which is called the TIP.
Okay.
Georgiana.
As you know, the TPO is required by state and federal law to approve a transportation improvement program. And so the TIP includes state and federally funded projects proposed in Brevard County over the next 5 years. So these are projects identified in the DOT work program. So the draft TIP has been open for public comment for 30 days. The TPO held an open house on June the 11th to get comments on the TIP projects. And the 5-year summary of funding shows over $715 million in federal, state, and local matching funding coming into Brevard County for all modes over that 5-year period, and that's a lot of money. So we are asking for approval of Resolution 19-01, approving our fiscal year 19 through 23 Transportation Improvement Program, and we need that via roll call vote,
All
please.
right, thank you, Georgiana. Any questions for Georgiana? Seeing none, I need a motion.
So moved.
All right, all right. I have a motion by Ms. Young, second by Mr. Johnson. Discussion? Seeing none, okay, I need a roll call vote.
Allender,
Yes.
Gallie,
Yes.
Barfield,
Yes.
Blanco,
Yes.
Holton,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Lopez,
Yes.
Meehan,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Nelson, Osmer,
Yes.
Pritchett,
Yes.
Randall,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Young,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
and Price.
Yes.
Did I miss anyone? Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Item 6C, approval of the work order 19-06K, the 2045 Long-Range Transportation Plan, the LRTP Scope of Services. And this is Stephen Bustel.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I get to serve as our project manager for our long-range transportation plan update. And so I'd like to get a show of hands just how many people in the room are familiar with the long-range transportation plan process. Pretty good. So I'll give a brief overview just to make sure we're
Just
all
no quiz. We
on the
don't want
same
the
page.
quiz.
No
Okay.
Our long-range transportation plan is our TPO's cost-feasible projects out to 20 years in the future. And all of the projects have to be included in the long-range transportation plan in order to receive any federal or state funding in the future. So all the projects you heard about earlier, they all had to be started and included in this plan at least 20 years ago for most of them. So it's been a long time in the process. And so due to a variety of changing factors, we have to update this plan every 5 years just because we don't have a crystal ball and things change as the economy changes. And so each update we have to take a look at land use plans, population forecasts, update those, look at revenue forecasts. We all know that cars are more fuel efficient and that the gas tax isn't really getting us as far as it used to. And actually at our TAC meeting on Monday, they sparked some good discussion on maybe exploring some ideas about new revenue sources as part of this long-range plan update. So that's something we're going to keep in mind moving forward. Another thing that we take a look at is any new needs that have come up. We look at everybody's existing transportation plans. We meet with all of your local staff to see what's in your comprehensive plans, and all of the modal agency, what's in their master plans at the port and the airport, and just to make sure we're all on the same page and we have everything included and we know what everyone's looking to do in the future. And another fun thing that we get to address in this update is performance measures that are required by the FAST Act and MAP 21. And so we have to make sure all of those are addressed, and we have to make sure our long-range plan is adopted in October of 2020. And so we're really hoping to kind of go off of the vision that we developed as part of our last long-range plan development. Many of you were involved in the development of our last plan. If not, your staff certainly were. We put a significant effort into scenario planning and finding out what the public wanted through public workshops. And we developed the economic growth vision based on everyone's input. And it really came up with these two questions, which are, what are Brevard's next economic and development drivers, and how can Brevard's transportation support these new drivers? And these were really good questions at the time because we were recovering from the economic recession at the time, and there were a lot of unknowns, and a lot's happened since then. We've seen space bounce back, buildings bounce back, and so we're really in a different place, and we'd really like to pick up with where we left off with the vision, since it looked all the way out to 2060. We feel it's still relevant. And some of the themes in the vision were leveraging what is uniquely Brevard, to continue to invest in ports and high-tech industry. Part of that high-tech is going to be autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles. That's the dialogue has come a long way since our last update, and getting prepared for those new technologies in transportation. All the while looking at our natural resources and preserving what is uniquely Brevard. We have rivers on both to our east and our west, and everyone's concerned about the Indian River Lagoon, so we want to make sure that we take a look at preservation as well. And we heard loud and clear from the public that they want choices and to improve how they live and travel, be it taking care of what we already have, and also expanding on our transit options and autonomous vehicles and things of that nature, and housing choices as well. So some of the younger generation doesn't want to drive as much. They want to live in more compact, dense areas, take transit, Uber and Lyft and all of those things. And so we need to start changing the way we have typically looked at our planning process. So here is our preliminary schedule. It's broken out into 6 main tasks. Public involvement, we're actually looking at getting a special firm to help specifically with public involvement. This time around, we want to make sure we have a large social media presence, really get out to the public more as well at some of your council meetings and stuff, to make sure everyone's aware and has input on the process. Then we have our goals, objectives, and measures. The data compilation, that's where we'll be meeting with all of your staff to make sure we have the right future land use, population, and data employment. And we'll be working on developing a traffic model to do some simulations to see what the future traffic demands will be based on future land use and development plans you have in your areas. And that will feed into our corridor strategic plans. We want to continue the corridor planning that we did in our last long-range plan, not just looking at capacity projects, but how can we improve travel across all modes on all corridors, kind of working towards that vision of every street being a complete street. And then we'll get into our cost feasible plan update. And that's where we'll get a chance to see, with the revenue forecasts and the needs that we found, how many projects can actually be funded. And so we're actually looking at this time having an unfunded needs list as well, so we can see the projects that didn't make the cost feasible plan, how much do they cost? Maybe there's other ways the local agencies can fund them, or if we can find new revenue sources, maybe they can be funded that way. And then, of course, documentation, and again, everything has to be completed in October of 2020. And so these are some actions that you all will be taking throughout the process. Today we have our work order approval. We'll be coming to you in the fall with our public participation plan, early next year with the approval of goals and objectives and measures, and then we'll be inviting all of you to all of our public workshops. We hope to see you all there, and then adoption of the cost feasible plan. One quiz though, when do we have to adopt it by? October 2020. And then here is the cost. This is similar to what our last long-range plan cost. It is a significant work effort. It takes us about 2 years to go through this entire process. And it's a little bit more than the last one due to the public engagement aspect. We're actually looking at having a few small videos put together through the public engagement firm, because people are more visual now, and we want to grab their attention online, and that seems to really be the way to go. So, and all of these funds have been budgeted for, and they're included within our UPWP, and they're being funded with PL grants and federal transit grants and SU funds. And then here's some of our key deliverables. I mentioned the extensive public outreach, the cost feasible plan, and the unfunded needs list. And one thing I'm really excited about is developing these agency action plans. So this is a new work product that we're looking at taking all of the information and related to each municipality or modal agency and kind of compiling it all in one short document that's relevant to, say, the City of Melbourne or City of Cocoa, to say, here's what you can do with your future land use, some policy decisions you might make, and the future population and employment projections, and vehicle volume projections, things of that nature, so you guys can use that to make decisions moving forward and when we get to our next long-range plan update, we can see how far we've come in all working towards that vision. So I'm very excited about that. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen?
I'll just make a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Holton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really happy to hear you talking about land use, because that really is going to drive a lot of the traffic, no pun intended. I know, for example, in the city of Palm Bay, we're the largest city in Brevard County. We're the most populated, and yet we're only 30% developed. So you can imagine the potential that's going to be occurring in the city of Palm Bay. I know Councilman Bailey, who's actually a member here today. Both he and I and Councilman Anderson, we are working on trying to move forward with a complete comprehensive plan for the city. We haven't really done a major comprehensive plan update in 10 or more years. So we're in the process of working towards that, and I know that that we'll be working a lot together. And so I would just encourage, other municipalities, if you're working on your comp plan, to certainly work with TPO staff, because that's extremely important when it comes to funding. The city of Palm Bay, we've got our major corridors. Palm Bay Road, fortunately, has had a lot of improvements through the years, as you know. Malabar, most of Malabar was turned over to the city for better or for worse, but there is the portion on the east side of Babcock. Babcock is something that's going to be of concern to South Brevard County, though, I can tell you that. I didn't want to hog the mic just for Palm Bay or South Brevard, but I just want to let you know there are big things to come in the city of Palm Bay.
Absolutely.
And so we're looking forward to working with you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or? No? All right, so I need a motion.
Mary, if there is no more questions, Randall's would move for approval of work order 1906K, and that's 2045. Most of us won't be here to see what.
I don't.
Mayor Randall, How many long-range plan updates have you been through?
Quite a few. But I'm honored, but yes, and finish, and thank you for taking the helm on this thing, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a second by Osmer. Mr. Osmer, any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? And I vote aye, and the motion passes. All right, we are now into reports and presentations, and I did say on the A, B, and C that we needed to shorten it. 5 minutes. No, I said I said 15 minutes, if we can, shorten it, so.
I think the last time I was up here was for Wickham, and I think I had to go about 10 minutes on like a 50-slide presentation. So I think I can make that work.
You can beat that.
Yeah. They're to have a contest.
All right. So how's everybody doing this afternoon?
Great.
All right. My name is Travis Sills. I'm with Kittleson & Associates. I'm here to present the outcome of the Aurora Road Corridor Planning Study. So what I'll do is I'll kind of go through these initial slides pretty quickly, get towards the meat, which is at the end of the presentation. So purpose of the study, first phase in the transportation development process, we're really trying to address safety and operational and transit issues along Aurora Road. We are down in Melbourne. Part of this is also Brevard County, from Wickham Road east to Stewart Avenue, which is one signal past Stewart Road / Commodore Boulevard. So not to get those confused, we're going one signal past that to the east. Highlight of public involvement. We had a project advisory team, TPO, FDOT, Brevard County, City of Melbourne, and Space Coast Area Transit, pretty comprehensive group. We held 3 public meetings, 120 total attendees. We also got some hits on our project website as well. People responded to comments about the project. We had 2 unique aspects of our public meetings. We had a create your own typical section station during our second public meeting, which actually got people to look at the roadway typical section and say, I have 63 feet of right-of-way, what can I fit in there? And they were able to see that if you add travel lanes or if you take away different elements of what's out there today and add some bike lanes, how that kind of affects the right-of-way within the typical section. We also had a 3D roadway alternatives section where we were able to put on some virtual reality glasses and kind of see, okay, if you were standing out there with the improvements that we had, here's what it would look like. So we have some of those 3D graphics here at the end as well. So highlight of existing conditions, a bunch of community features. So you got a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of residential, 5 different public schools, and then a private school along the corridor, so that'll play a factor in the ped bike traffic that we were seeing. With that being said, we were lacking pedestrian facilities, and so we have no bicycle facilities out there today. We have a 4-lane undivided roadway, gutter to gutter, or I guess edge of pavement to edge of pavement, and then we are missing areas of sidewalk. So anywhere where you see blue, that's where sidewalk is. Where you do not have it, large majority of the north side. What you'll see is you have that picture of that drainage ditch. You have a lot of those ditches on the north side, which is the reason why you do not have sidewalks on that north side. A little bit on the ped bike count. So we went out and did ped bike counts along the corridor. This is the peak 4 hours in the afternoon. What we wanted to highlight is Croton and Commodore. You'll see that you have those really high volumes, kind of east, west, north, south. Those are a lot of the school kids, either the high school or the elementary and middle schools walking along, either walking along Aurora or crossing Aurora. So it's a big deal along this corridor. High-level operations, our capacity, the biggest numbers that you want to see here, that AADT or the traffic along the roadway today, it's about 10,000 to 11,000 vehicles a day. Our capacity is somewhere in the mid to upper 30,000s. So what we're seeing is we're about 1/3 to 1/4 of the capacity for the 4-lane roadway that we have out there today. The graphs above just show that our average travel speed, average speed limit for vehicles is within the range, kind of that 35 to 45 mile an hour range. Not a lot of speeding issues that we saw out there. Also looked at crashes. What you'll see is the clusters of crashes, they happen around the intersections, the signalized intersections. I think we had almost 140 at Wickham Road. That was our high crash location. We had about 50 at Croton, and then I think around 25 at Commodore and Stewart. We did have a bicycle fatal crash between Croton and Commodore. What we did see was that of our ped and bike crashes that we had, a large majority were bicycle. And so you can correlate that, if you want, to the fact that there are no bike lanes out there. So either the bikes are riding on the sidewalk where vehicles aren't expecting them to be, or they're riding in the road. or they're trying to cross the road. So there's quite a few issues out there with the lack of pedestrian and bicycle facilities. Leading me into the issues and opportunities. So we broke this down into multimodal, so that's ped bike transit, and then we also did vehicular and drainage, which I'll talk about here in a second. But the main multimodal issue was the pedestrian and bicycle level of safety and comfort. And so we wanted to go through, try to facilitate those bicycle needs by trying to add bike facilities, trying to add that sidewalk on the north side where we were missing it, and then enhancing that sidewalk on the south side while also enhancing transit stops along the corridor as well. On the vehicular side, all those little blue water dots that you see, those are all the locations where we had pretty significant drainage swales on that north side, which directly correlates to where that sidewalk is not constructed on the north side as well. So those are some of the issues we were having. We also had some high crash, left turn crash emphasis areas, and we wanted to highlight the intersections as well for those angle and left turn crashes. So future conditions analysis. Before we got in and started exploring ways to kind of make this a more complete streets friendly corridor, we wanted to take a look at future no build. And so this is if you kept the lanes out there today, the 4-lane roadway, kept all the intersections the same, what you're seeing is that AADT and that capacity are still relatively low. I think we were looking at about a 0.5% growth rate along the corridor just because it's largely built out. This whole entire area is largely built out. We're not going to see a whole lot of traffic growth in the future. And the level of services were all C or B at the intersections as well, which is good. So in terms of the future build alternatives, so high level, what we were trying to do, we were trying to create a complete street along Aurora Road. Everybody knows or should know what a complete street is. It enhances all the multimodal features. It allows ped bike facilities, adequate ped bike facilities, transit users. It also accommodates vehicles as well, kind of maintaining that balance between all those different modes. What we see are some of the economic benefits of complete streets. And so this was a project that was recently completed. This is along Florida Avenue and Cocoa. We see that before we had a couple businesses there that were then redeveloped, either because of the Complete Streets project or shortly after the Complete Streets project. We also have landscaping opportunities as well. Landscaping wasn't as ideal. It wasn't something that was really discussed much. Some of the residents said they didn't really want the landscaping, and so that was fine. And we're not necessarily recommending this, but this is a kind of byproduct of kind of those complete streets, complete streets methodology as well. So one of the ways that you can do a complete streets project and facilitate those modes, and one thing that we explored along Aurora Road was a lane elimination or a road diet. We like to call it a road diet. Lane elimination has a pretty bad context. When you're saying, hey, we're going to take away your lanes, tend to get a negative reaction out of that. So we like to call it a road diet, but essentially they're the same thing. The most common type is going from a 4-lane undivided, which is what we have along Aurora Road, to a 3-lane divided section. And so what you'll see here is those graphics in the lower left. You have that 4-lane undivided. You go to the 3-lane with the center 2-way left turn lane. The safety on this. What we do is we ran a highway safety manual analysis on this corridor. So these are real numbers for Aurora Road. And we would see that the crash reduction would be about 20 to 30% on the corridor, which equates to about $5 to $7.5 million saved over a 20-year life cycle of the project. So keep that in mind as we start talking about project costs as well. So case study that we looked at, there's a couple more outlined in the report. This one was pretty applicable though. This is Edgewater Drive in Orlando, for those that are familiar with it. We had about 34% fewer crashes, 10% lower speeds, increase in ped bike activity, and the traffic volume, which is something that I wanted to point out, is about double what it is along Aurora Road. And so I drive this corridor pretty often. I work in Orlando. My bank is along this corridor, and so this corridor works from a 3-lane perspective. And then you get that increased economic benefit as well. So a little bit a graphic to kind of show how this works. So today along Aurora Road, if you come up to, let's say, Lansing Street, you have the situation above where you have folks that are the yellow cars that are coming up to the intersection along Aurora trying to make a left to go north onto Lansing Street. What you also have is the gray vehicles that may get caught in that inside lane and have to swerve over, maybe cut somebody off, cause a collision to get out of the way so that either they don't rear end somebody or because they want to get around them. what you see is that if you go to a 3-lane typical section, at that location, you can actually develop a left turn lane there. So just think of Lansing, if it had one travel lane in each direction, and then you had an exclusive left turn lane from Aurora Road to go northbound onto Lansing Street. What I did want to show is Helen Street. This was one of our 3D typical sections that we did, and this ties with a bus stop that's right where that mid-block crossing is. And so you could see that if you go from the 4-lane undivided, you add those sidewalks on the north side, you connect down to the bus stop, wider sidewalk, and those bicycle lanes as well. So then a little bit on Commodore as well. The before and after, 4 lanes along Aurora, you could come through and do the bicycle lanes. We were able to add a right turn lane to go south on Commodore to accommodate that AM high school traffic as well. We were also seeing some queuing northbound, so we were able to add a northbound left there as well. So some pretty significant changes to the Commodore intersection, but you're able to make it work with that road diet concept as well. So a little bit on the roadway improvements. So I'll go through these pretty quick to get to the matrix, but we looked at 6 different options overall. The first 2 dealt with adding a center 2-way left turn lane to the 4-lane section that's out there today. As you would expect, it incurs quite a bit more right-of-way if you're trying to do that type of improvement. This came out from our first public meeting where we had folks come out and say, we don't want you to do a road diet, we want you to put in a center 2-way left turn lane. And so we went through and explored that concept to see what the impacts would be. Options 3 and 4, these are your more short-term alternatives. And we were looking at essentially resurfacing the roadway, doing that road diet concept for options 3 and 4, putting in the center 2-way left turn lane, 1 travel lane each direction. You're able to have bike facilities and then improve the sidewalks as well. And then 5 and 6 is more of the same, just positioning your ped and bike facilities in different places along the roadway. Option 5, the distinct difference there is that we're able to maintain those swales on the north side of the road, and you put the shared use path on the back side near the right-of-way line. So what does this all mean? So we went through and did our qualitative assessment. So this really isn't putting numbers to anything. It's just more high-level impacts. What we saw is that generally all the alternatives improved ped or bike safety in some way. Even the 5-lane alternatives, you would go through and add bike facilities and sidewalks to that, so you would see an improvement in bicycle mobility and safety. What we did see is that as you went down to the road diet, you would see that adverse effect slightly in the vehicular mobility. So you are taking away a travel lane in each direction. We recognize that there would be a slight impact to operations at that point. But when you get into the overall cost of the improvements, you see at that 5-lane alternative, if you kept the 4 lanes out there, added the center 2-way left turn lane, it's by far and above the most cost from a right-of-way, drainage, utility, and cost and overall cost perspective. So the 3-lane options were looking pretty good. So what we ended up coming out with was a long-term vision to do a road diet along this corridor. What essentially happened was between the second and third public meetings, we took a 3-lane concept to the second public meeting. There was support for it. We had about 90% of people say, hey, we like this concept, we want to see it move forward. We came to our third public meeting, flushed that concept out a little bit more, and we had about 90% of the people say that they did not want a road diet concept. So it was a very stark difference between the second and third public meetings. Right. So what ended up happening is the county is going to move forward with a resurfacing project. They're going to resurface it as the 4-lane road that's out there today. What we did want to propose is a long-term vision for the corridor, which is slightly more money, in the $30 million range, and a large majority of that is because of the improvements that we'd be making to that north side. We'd be adding that shared use path, filling in the drainage ditch, we'd be piping it, for lack of a better term, and then you would have to buy off-site ponds, which is where that $18 million in right-of-way comes from. So we're not acquiring property along the corridor, we're acquiring pond locations potentially to treat all that water. So the action items on this vision, Brevard County will need to request the project to move off the candidate list and move it onto the priority list. We still have design, right-of-way, and construction phases that need to be funded. We're looking about 10 to 15 years to implement the long-term vision. So like I had mentioned on the next steps, Brevard County is going to resurface the roadway from Croton to Mosswood, including south side sidewalk ADA upgrades. City of Melbourne's also considering intersection improvements at Commodore as well. We also looked at some short-term improvements, one of those being the resurfacings, also emphasizing the intersections, going through and putting special emphasis crosswalk markings when you do that resurfacing project. And then a few projects that came out of the Wickham Road project, the Wickham Road operational analysis that tie into the Aurora Road project. So at the intersection of Wickham Road and Aurora, we're looking at doing a short-term project, about $200,000 to add curb ramps on all four corners, upgrade our crosswalk markings, and then also connect back to the bus stops. And then kind of midterm improvements at the same intersection would be looking to go forward with a couple turn lane improvements, looking at adding an westbound right and a northbound right, and kind of cleaning up that intersection, allowing for better capacity there as well. And then moving slightly north of the Aurora Road intersection on Wickham, this would be looking at access management improvements to the Northgate Plaza, looking at adding a median in there. That was one of our high crash locations from the Wickham project, and so kind of cleaning up that area and then moving the signal from the Northgate Plaza up to Northgate Street, where the McDonald's and the Krispy Kreme is. I don't know how long I went, but hopefully that was went through that relatively quickly. So, all right, so I'd be up for any questions.
Okay, no problem. Any questions? Mr. Smith?
Yeah, at Wickham, you say you're going to do some curb ramps, is that what you called it?
Yep.
Okay. But there's no sidewalks that go to those curb ramps, is that correct?
Along Aurora, west of the intersection, on the south side, no. Wickham, west side, going northbound, no. So the southwest corner would not have sidewalks that would be approaching it. The other three corners do have sidewalks.
Right.
Yep.
Well, that's been a complaint that I've heard. This is my district, and that's one of the complaints that I hear. And I can tell you that, so what you're saying is that you're not looking to make this a 3-lane road for another 30 years?
Aurora Road,
Right.
I don't know if I'd say 30. It'd be whenever the funding becomes available.
Well, I just want to tell you that the little kids that are in the Boys and Girls Club there and the other kids that walk to school, you're going to make them and their families and their parents, you're going to make them very unhappy. Because every time I speak to any of them, first question out of their mind is, when are we going to get sidewalks? So our friends can come play with us at night at the playgrounds or the Boys and Girls Club. So without sidewalks, their parents won't let them walk along Aurora Road.
I know.
Well, I agree.
Ms. Moore?
I agree with that, but I also was there.
Put your microphone down, too.
I also was there when you were doing your presentation for all three of them. And there were a lot of unhappy people with the word road diet. And I am concerned where you're talking about perhaps you're going to have ponding areas, because that's a really pretty built-up area along there. It's going to take a lot to buy some of that property, as you mentioned. And I agree that sidewalks would be a great thing. That road has been ignored, totally ignored for years. What sidewalks are there are in deplorable condition, and the culverts are non-existent. They're just big water puddles when it rains and it comes across the road. But the businesses along there and the schools do not want to see lose a lane, even though it looks good on paper. They don't want it. That word road diet, it was really a nasty 4-letter word.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that from my own perspective, the second public meeting where we introduced the road diet concept and we had people create their own typical sections, like I said, we went back and looked. We had about 90% of people that wanted that typical section. I will agree that during the third public meeting, it swung completely the opposite way.
That's right.
And so, are the same people showing up to the same meetings? I'm not sure, but I agree that for a certain percentage of people, it was a term that was not endearing, I guess. But there were a certain amount of people that did ultimately like that concept at some point in time.
Well, we have some development that's going on Gallie Boulevard. And there was discussion about how much more, if we went ahead with this road diet on Aurora, how much more it would put on Gallie Boulevard, and what impact it would have. So when it came to us that the road diet was gone, and that's the word that we received, that it wasn't going to happen, that put a whole different spin on the development that was going on Gallie Boulevard.
Mayor?
Okay. I've got Mr. Holton and then Ms. Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I remember when divergent diamond was a dirty word. Does everyone remember that?
Yes.
And it wasn't until I was in Brevard, North Carolina, and I went on my first divergent diamond that I said, hey, wait a minute, this works. Okay? Not Brevard County, North Carolina. It's a city called Brevard. At any rate, the point is do we have examples of this, for leadership, leaders in the community like ourselves, and most importantly, our residents, that can drive on a road similar to this? Do we have anything like this in Brevard County that people can experience for themselves? Because I understand, change is the enemy to progress, said P.T. Barnum, right? So do we have anything like that?
I know that there are 3-lane roads in Brevard County, so it'd be similar to that. In terms of the experience of a complete street, I'd have to point to a couple of the complete streets projects that have just been built. So Minuteman, Florida Avenue, Hopkins is going to be under construction, I think sometime over the next year, 6 months.
Later
And
this year.
Yeah,
we're under
so-
construction at Hickory Street.
Right, and Hickory Street as well.
Yeah.
And those typical sections aren't specifically they may not be a specific 3-lane section, but they have those complete streets type elements and that feel that we were trying to achieve along Aurora.
South Patrick comes to mind as far as a 3-lane road. I think the challenge here, I think it was Chris that said when he presented on Gallie on Monday, these sidewalk projects are turning into drainage projects, and they are extremely expensive to the point where they're not even feasible. I mean, $30 million to put in a sidewalk. And that's a lot of money considering the challenges that we face in transportation.
Ms. Lopez.
Yes.
I agree with Councilwoman Moore. I don't want to lose a lane on Aurora Road, but I do like the idea of bike paths on both sides. I think that's great. And also fixing the sidewalks. I mean, maybe we should look at fixing the sidewalk, not so, a little bit more narrow to have the bike paths. But I don't support getting rid of one of those.
Mayor?
Yeah, Ms. Moore.
There is a project in Orlando where they did a street diet, but they put temporary blocking off stanchions, temporary, and it was an absolute nightmare, and I was following it because of this Aurora Road project. It was such a nightmare that they decided it was not feasible because they weren't able to move the amount of traffic that they needed to move in a certain given time. So I followed that one very, very close, and they were smart when they didn't do it with a road diet completely, but a temporary situation. And as I say, it did not work at all.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of curious what the traffic count was, because that's a busy road, what they did, versus Aurora, So that was interesting.
Well,
There's
Aurora
different circumstances and everything that goes into making these types of decisions as well. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else? Oh, yeah.
Sure. I guess when you looked at one of the statistics that you put up there is how many cars were traveling, which you came to about 11,000, which is actually only 1/3 of the capacity. And I understand that no one wants to lose a lane, but I guess if you really had to look at if you had the capacity going on that road, I can only imagine what people would think then. Because really, you only have 1/3 of the cars that was built for traveling on that road now. And you don't want to give up a lane, you only have 1/3 of the traffic on there. I could only imagine if it was at capacity. It makes me wonder, in a sense, though, is that capacity actually a good number to go for? I mean, I just say, I mean, we're talking now, if you take a lane out, people are saying, man, 11,000 cars a day on there, there's no way we're going to survive taking out those lanes. I'm thinking, well, you only have 11,000. What would you do if you had 33,000, that's what the road is built for? People would really go. So I almost have to question, well, is 33,000 really the capacity for that road? Because if it's that big of a deal to cut that one lane out at only 11,000, at only 1/3 of the capacity, I have to wonder if the capacity is actually correct. Or at least, maybe in someone's opinion, it's definitely not correct. But the statistics for it and the counts obviously don't represent that when you talk to the citizens who say,
Yeah.
you know, the traffic would be a nightmare, we won't be able to move that much traffic and on there. And I'm like, geez, we're only at 1/3 of the capacity now, and we say we couldn't do that?
I think Trey hit that when he said the change. It's about change. People think, well, you know, we got 4 lanes now, we're going to have 3. I'm going to be inconvenienced, and I don't like change.
All right, yeah. Mr. Bailey?
I'm just curious, what's the long-term opportunity cost as far as maintenance going with the expanded road compared to the 3-lane?
The expanded road.
Well, going with something that's larger or even at 4, is there any type of, what's the reduction in the maintenance cost by going to a 3-lane model? Is there
I
a
do not know.
reduction in maintaining, keeping up the
I do not know. Yeah, we didn't look into that.
Okay. All right, anything else? All right, thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
Hills, very good. Item 7B is State Road 518, Gallie Boulevard, conceptual design. And let me get to that.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
I'm Judy Pizza, planner, project manager with Florida DOT. I'm project manager for this study, and with me is Chris Rizzio with AECom. He's going to be doing the technical part since I'm a planner. He's more authoritative in that part. So moving along, project location you can see on the map. It's a tiny little area there in the Atlantic Beach, in Melbourne and Brevard, and more closer what the project limits are. We're a smidgen to the west there on 518 going across to the causeway, and a little bit north and south on South Patrick, and then going over to A1A, again just a little bit north and a little bit further south on A1A. This shows you our boundaries of the municipalities that were involved in this study. As I said, Indian Harbor Beach to the north, Melbourne to the south, and then the unincorporated Brevard County in the grayish area. So, cut through all of that. In the beginning, we did a planning phase, which was completed in March of 2016. Out of that study were 3 priority groups: bike lanes, sidewalks, and the A1A intersection being the first, the relief bridge and access management, and the State Road 513 intersection being the second, and the third was roundabouts and a median there at, is it Barnes Noble? Oh, well, we skipped it. It escapes us now. Moving along, though, in the concept design activities, 2 of those groups moved forward, being the sidewalks and bike lanes, transit access, and drainage came up as a very important item to evaluate. Our project visioning team, which we call those stakeholders that are more closely, more intimately engaged in this project, are listed here. The DOT, of course, Space Coast TPO, the municipalities, Indian Harbor Beach and Melbourne, Brevard County School Board, Space Coast Area Transit, very engaged, and the Space Coast Office of Tourism, and 2 advocacy groups, as well as very high-level business owners who were engaged. So the PVT meetings, we had 2 of those, And their involvement is giving us a more intimate, closely, they're out there, they use the corridor, they work on the corridor, they live on the corridor, so they provide us a focus that we're not going to have. We come from DeLand, spend a couple hours and go. You live here, so you know what's going on. So we really depend upon that input from our PVT. And now we're going to go to sidewalks, and I'm going to turn this over to Chris. But before I turn it over to Chris, I do want to make note that we're a little bit ahead of our typical schedule. When we come to the TPO or the TAC, we typically have already done our public meetings, but we wanted to get in here before you folks went on break. So our actual public meeting is August 30th. So you'll be hearing about that.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks, Todd. The priority 3 group were roundabouts at Burns and San Juan, which is in front of Winn-Dixie with a median between the two. The priority 3 group improvements are not part of this conceptual design study, so just the priority 1 and priority 2 groups. And that's what I'm going to go over now. So what we did is refined those groups. I'll go through each of the items in there just to explain what we're going to put forth to the public on August 30th. So the first and the main part of this is a sidewalk. There's no sidewalk on the north side of Gallie Boulevard. Brevard County had a project 20 or so years ago to put a sidewalk along the south side that's existing. They closed the drainage, they piped it, but there are no sidewalks on the north side except in certain private developments outside the right-of-way. So we propose to close those gaps, and it's a large gap, on the north side and provide sidewalk, connect to any existing sidewalks that are out there. What this does is, because there's only 100 feet of right-of-way out there, and it's open drainage through swales, when we put a sidewalk in, it reduces that width we have for swales, and this is what Georgiana was alluding to, where sidewalk jobs become drainage jobs. We can't have both. So we have to close that drainage, which is pipes, curb and gutter, and get it to the ponds. While we were in our PVT meetings and while we were looking at this, we realized that there are pedestrians out there, and there's no real good way for them to cross the street except at the signals over at South Patrick and at A1A. So we wanted to investigate areas where we may be able to provide mid-block crossings. And we found 2 locations, one to the east of Burns and another further east at an existing transit stop. Now, why this is challenging on this particular project, it's a 5-lane section out there. When we have a mid-block crossing, you want a raised pedestrian refuge, similar to what's going on A1A. And there's so much access, free access from properties. By raising the median, it really restricts some of the access to and from the properties. But we did find 2 good locations. The one to the east of Burns is approximately midway between the 2 signals, which is great, and it's also the main access to the residential community to the north. And at the east side, which you see up here, that's at an existing transit stop, and that will allow for people that need to cross the street safely to do so at that transit stop. We also propose a higher visibility section with rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or RFBs. You've seen these on A1A as well. This will really alert the motorists out there that people are crossing, because you need to yield and stop for pedestrians in intersections.
Mayor, we have 3.
Yeah.
That's a correction. We have 3. You said 2.
No, well, we're proposing 2.
Okay, but there are, you'd mentioned it, at this time, there are only 2. There is a 3rd at the Winn-Dixie. There's a stoplight right there.
There is a stoplight. There's no crosswalk there. Oh, but you're right. There's 3 signals. There's no crosswalk at the light at Winn-Dixie. San Juan across is not part of that signal. So there are no pedestrian signals or pedestrian crossings. Now, we do propose to add crosswalks at that location. So you're correct, but that'll be at a signal and not at, this is the mid-block crossings with the flashing RRFBs.
Okay.
So yes, there's a 3rd opportunity for pedestrians as part of this.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
The flashing, is that like the yellow lights that we see flash on Aurora Road? If pedestrians want to cross the road, they push the button?
This is not the flashing yellow signals, but these are pedestrian crossing signs, the yellow diagonal, pedestrian crossing, but they're very, very high-intensity flashing rectangular beacons.
Oh,
Right,
okay.
we've got
That's
one
what I
in
was
front.
going to ask. Is it in front of City Hall?
Is that the RFBs out there? Yeah,
And we've got one.
and that's that. I mean, it's visible. It's really visible. There are different kinds. There are kind that are sign mounted. There's also some overhead kinds
I
that
like
are
the
allowed.
overhead. Yeah.
So, yeah, those are things that we want to look at further in design to make it really, really.
That's right. And I think when you said the overhead as well as the rectangle, I think that would really work. Because
Yeah.
I see this all the time in downtown.
Yeah, and it really does help. I'm from Orlando. We have one at a trail crossing that, I mean, people stop. I didn't think they would, but they do
Okay.
when they see these things. Another thing that came out was from the planning study was improving the State Road A1A intersection. There are free flow right turns eastbound to southbound and southbound to westbound. They conflict with pedestrians because it's free flow. Motorists aren't expecting them now. We've learned that people do park at the Walmart and cross over to Canova Beach. And the planning study recommended removing those free flow right turns and bringing the right turn movements up to the signal, which we have refined. And you'll see a picture of that in the next slide. This also removes the weave condition as you head southbound on A1A. The outside lane turns into a turn lane, so you have the free flow rights going eastbound to southbound, weaving out with the southbound A1A traffic trying to get into Walmart. In addition, we propose to extend the median on 518 to the west, not all the way to the intersection right before San Juan, but part of the way there, and that was also part of the planning study, and there's going to be no conflicts with queuing traffic or anything. We ran some numbers. And here's a picture of it. You could see, I do want to point out that the free flows are gone. All of the right turn lanes are brought to the signal. So where you see the green areas, that returns to nature, so to speak. That's grass now. And on the south side of that, you see where there is no more weave condition to the Walmart, it actually develops a right turn lane southbound into Walmart. So, this provides an opportunity for pedestrians to cross both north and south of that intersection and get to the beach, and not have to cross free-flowing traffic. As part of this, there are two scat lines along 518, and you can see the bus stops there. There's no access from the existing sidewalks on the south side, and there are no sidewalks on the north side. And in some instances, the stop signs are right near a swale. So we reviewed, just in laying this out, we want to relocate a couple of these stops. Very minor, 50 feet, 100 feet, one way or the other. We got with SCAT. They're good with it. And we also want to provide boarding and alighting pads, which are a minimum 5x8 concrete pad with access to the sidewalks out there at each of these stops, just to make it safer for transit users. In addition, I didn't talk about bike lanes. There is a 5-foot shoulder out there that acts as an undesignated bike lane, but there are many, many right turn lanes out here, and you can see in that aerial photograph. There are no keyhole lanes, and I don't know if you're familiar with what keyhole lanes are, but those are the 5-foot bike lane between a right turn lane and the through lane. And we would want to provide these as a continuation on those shoulders. So, to do that, that requires 5 feet of roadway widening, and this again impacts the drainage because it's such a narrow corridor. We won't be able to use swales in that case anymore. So you can see in that photograph we would have to bring everything out 5 feet. So in those instances, we would also have to close the swales, pipe them, and add a closed drainage system. And since we've been hinting at drainage, let's talk about it a little bit. The existing system, again, is ditches and storm sewers. Storm sewers primarily on the south side, ditches on the north side. Most of it, except for the far eastern end, is conveyed to the large pond. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's on the river to the west of South Patrick on the south side of 518. The planning study didn't really get into the details of the drainage concept. That's why we wanted to focus on it here before this moves into final design. So the existing system, again, everything drains to these stormwater ponds. That's a diagram of the larger pond on the south side of the road. It was built in 1984 as part of the South Patrick intersection improvements. There are also two smaller ponds on South Patrick, north and south of 518, that take care of some of that intersection traffic, or the intersection drainage. So right now it's working, but we're adding additional impervious areas with the sidewalk to the north, any right turn lanes where we add these bicycle keyholes, and it reduces or just flat out eliminates the drainage swales that are there. So that's where we would have to close the drainage.
Could I ask a question on that?
Yeah, sure. Ms. Young.
Thank you very much. with this more pavement that you're adding, and you're closing the system, what size pipes are you planning to use in there? Because that's an issue now. The water can't, when it runs off, it can't get off fast
Right,
enough.
Exactly, and we would have to, I touch on it in a couple slides, but you're 100% correct. We have to rework the existing system that's out there and add new pipes.
But with the underground fiber or cables or underground sewer and water that's already there, I mean, I know in where I am, it's very difficult to change that. Once you open it, you open up a whole can of worms under there.
It's a big impact. There's utilities everywhere out there. It drives up the cost of the project. And I have some preliminary cost numbers. For a job like this, the design and construction numbers are about twice that what you would expect for that reason. That's what makes these sidewalk jobs sometimes very difficult, because the drainage systems have to be reworked. And you see this everywhere. There's another, I think you might hear a little bit about this on the next presentation too. These are old roads. They were built with swales when everything wasn't as developed, and now as we grow and realize that we want to accommodate bicycles, we want to accommodate pedestrians, which we should be doing, there are other impacts that we have to chase. So sometimes it's, you get into this and you realize, like what you said, you got to chase that rabbit down. Now we have drainage, now we have utilities, and it becomes difficult. Now, as engineers, we can do it, but that increases the cost of the projects.
Ms. Moore?
The south side of 518 is my district, and I've been dealing with a subdivision, a very large mega church, and et cetera, on the south side with drainage. And we've been fortunate enough that we were able to tie in some of the 518 drainage back all the way across Texas Roadhouse, if any of you are familiar with it, and the mega church into Oceanside subdivision, because we weren't able to give them their final approval because of drainage issues, but they have a ponding area there that we have now tied some of that drainage into that situation. And there is, on the corner of it'd be Riverside Drive, South Patrick is on the other side, where there's a shopping center there that you get 10 drops of rain and you've got a flood.
Yeah, we saw that being out there as well.
You saw that mess that is out there. So there is a lot of water that is going to have to be dealt with.
Yes.
Just even on that south side. And I'm not sure how much room we've got, because this is being developed, all that strip along there, more and more, and we're taking up ground absorption.
Yeah, and you're 100% correct. We pulled a lot of the permits out there, and a lot of those properties are tied in to the system. So that's where, in design, they're going to have to take a very, very close and very hard look at this to see, like Ms. Young said, what do we have to put out there to really accommodate all this? When we first went out there, it was 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma. There was a freak storm that sat right here. And we went out, I don't know, 3 or 4 days later, and there was standing water everywhere.
Everywhere.
Especially at where you're talking about, we saw a lot.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's why we wanted to look at this now, because, we want to let the final design folks know, look, you really have to scope out this drainage design properly, because it's not, we can't just throw sidewalks out there. You guys really have to take a close hard look. We don't have, as part of the scoping for this phase, we identify what the design folks need to look at, and this is what we're going to tell them. The drainage has to be very robust.
This is a one-shot deal.
Yes.
I mean, we've got to get it right the first time, simply financially. This is going to be a very expensive project.
And it will be, especially down at Patrick, there's probably going to be, construction is going to be somewhat disruptive, most likely, as well. Okay. And yeah, you're right, we'll do it once and do it properly. Well, we've talked about a lot of this already, so that's good. One thing we think we should be able to use that existing pond that's out there and rework it. More detailed analysis needs to be done, but with the limited information that we have, it does not appear that we would have to provide new ponds, which is, you had pointed out earlier, is in an area as developed as this and built out as this. That is incredibly expensive, and leads to relocations as well.
Does this pond, is it by evaporation, or does it have a drainage into the lagoon?
It has drainage underneath it, and there's some under drains around the outside. So it's more of a, what they called back then, a sedimentation pond. It's from 1984.
Yeah, I know the
So-
names. That's why I asked you.
Yeah, so it would have to be reworked. We think it can be reworked to work properly, but that's another thing that will have to be scoped in final design to take a close, hard look at this, because ponds, as you saw in the last presentation, are very expensive.
Well, I don't want anything more going into the lagoon.
Right, and there is special protections on the lagoon as well. We wouldn't connect right to this pond and send everything in there. They would have to do some rework and bring it up to current standards. But we think it could work, so that's a start. One thing I did want to touch on was the Indian River Relief Bridge. This was identified in the planning study. Unfortunately, there were some fatalities on this bridge on the north side several years back. The existing condition of the bridge is there is a barrier-separated pedestrian facility on the south side. The north side is signed, no fishing. There is no sidewalk leading to the north side. That doesn't keep people from the north side. But there is a safe way to cross at South Patrick to get on the south side and go to the park on the left. It's very important to everybody, and especially the folks of Indian Harbor Beach, that we have safe pedestrian accommodations. We coordinate with the different departments in DOT, and at the moment, as part of this project, to just barrier separate something on the north side still isn't particularly safe because it doesn't lead to anything. However, through the project visioning team meetings, a separate trail project that would include accommodations on this bridge is been applied to be placed on the trail priority list. And that would kind of complete a loop around the causeway, because right now it's only on the south side. So as part of this project, we're not looking at doing anything to the bridge beyond how it is today, because we could lead people to the bridge, but then if they would go to the west, and they're on the shoulder of a 45-mile-per-hour causeway. But this is going to move forward just as part of a separate project. I touched on this a little earlier. The estimated project costs, we just did some rough estimates right now. The design would be around $500,000. Construction, a little over $5 million. It's a 1-mile project. It's more than you would expect for a simple resurfacing. And again, that is because of the drainage work and the utility work as well. Now, that $5.3 million includes maintenance of traffic, mobilization, and 10% contingencies. I like to throw a lot more contingencies at this phase. I like to put 25% contingencies, but our program doesn't let us go that high. But I would not be surprised if construction was higher than the $5.3 million out there. South Patrick intersection, there are utilities under that road going every direction, and there's a lot of them. So our next steps, like Judy mentioned, we have a public meeting on August 30th. Your agenda packet says the 1st. We had to move that back. So it is August 30th. That's a Thursday at Indian Harbor Beach City Hall. Based on the results of that meeting, we'll do our final refinement of the alternatives, document this all in a feasibility technical memorandum, and then the next phase would go directly into final design, which at this time is not funded. And if you have any other questions, we would be happy to take them, or if you need to get in touch with us at a later date, here is our contact information.
Thank you, Chris and Judy. Any questions? All right, Georgiana.
Judy, I cannot remember, did we look to see if this was on the resurfacing list, if something was going to be coming up in the near future?
I don't believe this one was.
Because that, anytime we can get an opportunity to get these type of improvements incorporated into a resurfacing, it's a bigger bang for the buck. The Fiske project that is coming up is going to have a few projects incorporated into that resurfacing, but so we'll have to keep our eye on that when it shows up in the work program.
Yeah, as you pointed out, that's something that we really do watch for, to see if there's what we like to refer to as the low-hanging fruit. If there's something we can snag and throw into resurfacing, we'll do that. Unfortunately, there was nothing in the short term that's coming up.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Item 7C, State Road 519, Gallie, Fiske Boulevard, the conceptual design.
There we are. And
Yep.
I'm back again. I'm Judy Pizzo with the Florida DOT. And again, I was the planner and project manager on this study. So, yeah, I need a little satellite office over here. So, whoops, I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, I'm confused here, confused myself, excuse me. This was originally a planning study, again, as the previous State Road 518. We do a planning study first to sort of hone out what is there, or should this go into a PD&E? And sometimes when we go into the concept development, we discover, yes, it probably should have some PD&E aspects to it. So from the corridor planning study, which was completed in December of 2016, we came up with existing and future conditions and developed some alternatives and refined those alternatives. Well, in the concept development, we further defined those alternatives, first going back and reviewing, again, the existing and future conditions. Things change after a year or so, so it's important to reevaluate those. So coming out of that, we have, within the next 5 years, some short-term projects. There is a resurfacing in this corridor. We refer to that as the 3R. There's also some tweaking of the State Road 519 at Barnes Boulevard. There's a misalignment of that intersection, so we'll touch on that a little bit more. Todd will in his part of the presentation. We also have at Roy Wall Boulevard and Levitt Parkway some concerns that we're going to be addressing further with our traffic operations unit. So we'll talk about that a little bit too in Todd's part of the presentation. I want to reiterate, though, that's something we'd refer to as more the long-term improvements to a corridor versus some of the short-term that we can implement in the 3R. So, moving along, study area limits. We're from County Road 502, or Barnes Boulevard, there at Interstate 95, northbound to State Road 520, King Street. It's a little bit over 4 miles in length. And again, as with 518, we cover multiple jurisdictions, City of Rockledge and City of Cocoa. It was originally a county road and transferred over to the department in the 1980s. That created some interesting challenges. When you had that transition, not all the records were available to us. This corridor is very transitional in character, and it is a north-south route between I-95 and State Road 520. And the connection to Vieira to the south. So, again, we had a project visioning team, a lot of the same folks, as well as, instead of the previous communities, we were looking at Cocoa and Rockledge in our group. And again, they brought with them that local knowledge that we don't necessarily have. It's much appreciated. So the data updated for the corridor planning study, as I said before, it was existing and future conditions. We also looked at turning movement counts, the bicycle and pedestrian counts, which are very important in a corridor of this length. Signal timings, again, how is this working? Is it safe for pedestrians to get across? Is there enough time for them to get across? Corridor crash data, is there any change from the previous information we had from the 2016 study? Transit data, again, Space Coast SCAT was very involved with it, and we appreciate their help as well in working on that. The socio and economic data, that's very important in a corridor of this nature, especially when you have such a difference between Rockledge and Cocoa in its night and day. The infrastructure assessment and environmental data. When we previously did the planning study, not a lot was happening. Well, here we are 2 years later, and in the south end of 519 Fiske Boulevard, you've got subdivisions coming in, you've got a hotel coming in, so that really impacts what we knew then to what we know now. So I'm going to let Todd take over from here.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Todd Davis. I work with VHB, consultant to DOT. And as Judy mentioned, as you heard from Chris earlier, I kind of wanted to backtrack to the really intent of the concept development study. As Judy mentioned, the planning study is our first attempt. We use state funds to do that for the department. We move into concept development. The intent of concept development is to really evaluate and create this technical scope to move to design. We don't want to just have design, make all decisions, take one step forward, 2 steps back, and do that dance, if you will. We're trying to nail all that with public involvement ahead of time. So that's the intent of doing these studies and creating these estimates and know how much is going to design, ultimately how much is going to construction. So it's a good understanding for how we're coming up to these studies. As part of this, as Judy mentioned, we reevaluated, recollected all the data as part of this concept development study. We saw really the main differences. There was an increase in crashes, not one specific location, but throughout the corridor, crashes did increase, particularly rear end collisions. In addition, we did see traffic volumes go up, especially the southern side. It was 15% just within those 2 years. It was an annual growth of 15%. And what that could be contributed to is Barnes Boulevard was recently widened to 4 lanes, so maybe now without the construction, more people are going along Barnes Boulevard. The traffic, the roadway characteristics are also different on the south side. So on the south side, you have an open swale, you have a wider right-of-way. When you start going up north, your sidewalks are now abutting the sidewalk rather than being outside the open swale. So the characteristics change as well as the traffic patterns. Excuse me. One thing I do want to mention is that these traffic patterns might additionally change maybe in the decrease. As you guys are well aware of, the Vera interchange is going to be constructed soon. Right now it's not open. When they connect that, that might again reduce it because maybe more people are using that interchange rather than the Fiske Boulevard interchange. So there's a lot of questions there, but as of right now, we did see the increase after the Barnes Boulevard construction. Consistent with the other studies, we did do a future build-out at 2040. We used an annual growth of 1.68. It's what we saw historically and what we utilized for this study. Really the biggest thing is it's consistent with the planning study. There is no widening needed. The traffic conditions, the capacity of that roadway is there. It's really a safety matter and trying to get pedestrians and vehicles in and out of that corridor. Kind of highlight the key aspects that we'll be going over in regards to how we came up with our alternatives. We're looking at level of service, the traditional grading scale, A to F, A being best, F being the worst. We look at the right-of-way, and Judy kind of highlighted on it. It's a corridor that was transferred over to the department. It used to be a county facility back in the 80s. It was transferred over to the department. It was a swap with Barnes Boulevard. Surprisingly, nothing came with it. We have no plans. We don't know how the roadway is constructed. We don't know what's underground. We have no idea. The stuff Chris mentioned earlier with the drainage of Gallie, we don't have that. We don't know how the underground piping is. All we know is we have 3 permits along this corridor, and we know it goes out to a lake kind of along the northwest, west of Fiske. There's 1 pond, and then we know there's 3 permits go there. The rest of the corridor, we have no idea. We just know there's some parts open swale, some parts have a ditch. Underground, we have no idea how it works. So that's one of the biggest steps is we may make recommendations, but we don't know what the costs associated with it because we don't know what we need to improve or how it operates today. The other side of that, too, is that we know the right-of-way limits go outside that sidewalk on the outside. It's pretty wide. But the maintenance the department does is only along the roadway and the sidewalk that's abutting the actual edge of road. The open swales and the sidewalks outside of that are currently maintained by the city and the county. So the question is, where does the state right-of-way end and where does the county? That's also an unknown because, again, we have no maps. Historically, we have a gentleman that's been the public works director for the city of Rockledge for a while. He knew the history of it. He knew the foreseen agreements, but we have no documentation saying whether or not who's maintaining what, who's doing what. It's all just, it's working right now. I say working kind of in quotations because as the last hurricane hit, Hurricane Irma, there were some houses that were flooded because of the open drain swales that ended up rising too high into the houses. So it's a conversation that's going on right now, not just with this study, but beyond the study with the Secretary of District 5, trying to figure out how best to look at this and get an agreement, formal agreement between all the local jurisdictions. We also look at transit, working with SCAT, as Judy mentioned, look at safety and also the control modification. Currently looking at the existing year, this is AM on the top, PM peak conditions, which is AM 7 to 9, PM 4 to 6. Looking at the operations, the key ones I want to highlight again is Barnes Boulevard operating at the level of service F and 520 also operating near capacity at the level of service E. There were 2 intersections the locals asked us to look at. Judy touched on is Roy Wall Boulevard and Levitt Parkway. Right there, if you look to the left of the figure, it's those 2 stop-controlled intersections. Both roadways are set at an offset, both with the eastern roadway being higher north than the western section. So what happens is when people make that left-hand turn, they're basically making a left into each other. So it's an unsafe condition. And also the amount of capacities out there not enough to serve the motoring public right there. So right now, while Fiske works okay, the side streets do not, so that's why they're level of service F. Again, we looked at the future conditions at 2040. Same typical conditions, however, now during the PM, 520 does operate adversely, as well as Barton Boulevard right there in the middle, where the city of Rockledge City Hall is. That's also operating at a level of service F. So looking at these conditions, we identify certain areas that are concerned to see how we can appropriate and come up with alternatives that will fix these issues. So I'm going to go through kind of holistically what the improvements are. They're different throughout the corridor because of the right-of-way concerns or a curb and gutter issue. Sometimes your curb might be in by a foot, so instead of having a 6-foot bike lane, you have a 5-foot bike lane. So there might be some slight variances, which we have all the information available online, but I'm going to go over holistically of which each improvement we looked at. Right now, there's no bicycle lanes along this roadway. It's just you have some areas where you have open, you have an extra shoulder there that people kind of utilize as a bike lane, but we're looking at bike facilities. As part of the 3R project, we were fortunate enough to be on the front end of when they were designing the 3R project or creating the scope for design, and they did include the bicycle lanes as part of the 3R project. So right now it's under bid. We're going to select a consultant to do the design of the 3R project. We probably will have them under contract, I say, later this year, maybe November. And that design will incorporate bicycle lanes throughout the corridor. There might, again, be some variances from our long-term solutions because of width. We're trying to move curb, which increases the cost, maybe increasing the size of the bike lanes. There's also some locations, especially on the south side, along the west side of Fiske, that there are open gaps. There are some locations that have no sidewalks. The 3R project will also be incorporating the sidewalk reconstruction or construction of those and filling the gaps as part of that project. So as Georgiana mentioned, we were on the front end of this 3R project scope, and we were able to incorporate a lot of the stuff from our planning study. Going to safety now, as I mentioned before, there was an average per year increase, also rare collisions. Good news is we did decrease the number of fatalities and injuries, so there was some good with the bad throughout the corridor, but this is just based upon the past 2 years that we recollected the data. There are 4 transit routes that go along this corridor, very consistent with the Gallie. There are several locations that may just have a bus sign, that's it. Or my favorite is at Barton Boulevard, they have a bench, and the bench is about a 25-degree angle. I don't know who's going to sit on that bench because they're going to be very close to their neighbor and get to know them very quickly. But we're looking at trying to, again, do the 8A compliance, do a 5x8 landing pad, also trying to level that ground at a retaining wall because there is a vertical difference there, so there are some differences we're trying to do there. Also working with SCAT to figure out how to do that. There will be some 8A compliance at ramps as part of the 3R project. So you see there's a lot of stuff we can do in a 3R project, but some things we can't because of technicalities, costs, and so forth that the 3R project can't always accommodate, especially when you start adding too much details. Again, as part of this is a summary of kind of everything I've gone through. I'm going to go through some additional details. One key item, when we started this whole process, we looked at saying, well, it's an existing 5-lane section along the entire corridor. Could we add a median, or can we just add bike lanes only? What do we want to do? Unfortunately, the width of the asphalt is not wide enough to add a median the entire length, because based upon standards, you have to have enough room to have someone make a U-turn safely. Because that width of the asphalt, if they made a U-turn there and you add a median, they're probably doing a 5-point turn, which again is not safe, especially when you have a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit and someone's approaching you. So because of that, we didn't do a landscape median throughout the corridor, but we had spot medians that we're calling landscaped islands to give that physical barrier and hopefully slow down the traffic to a certain extent. The other side of it is we couldn't add it specifically in the Hans Christian Andersen School. There's an elementary school along this corridor, and we've been out there several times, and during the pickup time frame in the afternoon, that middle turn lane becomes a queue storage lane. It backs up almost to Roy Wall, and that's a long way because there's an existing pedestrian crossing, and they just sit there and use it as a parking lot. So we definitely do not want to put a median there because those people get moved into the actual travel lane. So we try avoiding any medians in that way to accommodate Hans Christian Andersen. The one thing I do also want to note is we did have a public meeting. Gallie's a little ahead. We had our public meeting right before July 4th. We had about 120 people there. It was a good turnout. And we did have some teachers from Hans Christian Andersen there that was supporting us and also giving some more detail of how to accommodate the students in the area. Especially there's a great majority of them that bike and walk in the area. Luckily, there is a good wide sidewalk currently in some areas. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you'll see the red highlights. Those are the areas where there are currently sidewalk gaps that will be constructed as part of the 3R. In addition, we coordinated with the TPO and looked at a potential trail in this section, the Brevard Zoo Trail that will run from Barnes Boulevard up to Eyster. We're incorporating as part of our long term. Again, some things we can't include as part of 3R. This is one of them because of the width. We're looking at 10-foot lane. We have 7-foot in some sections, 5-foot in others. Trying to accommodate that 10-foot is going to be hard, but we're going to look at that as a part of long term. In addition, when you look at the FDOT design manual, the way they look at it today, we look at context classification. That's how we design the roadway nowadays. When you look at this corridor, it's what's called a Class 3. As part of that, we have to make sure all those sidewalks are wide enough to accommodate the pedestrians. The trail will be 10 feet, which is good, but it's only on one side of the roadway. What about the other side of the roadway? Well, we're going to upgrade and change all those 4-foot sidewalks to 6-foot sidewalks. Now, it's 5 feet. Is it really worth it to reconstruct the whole sidewalk for 1 foot? In our minds, no. It could always be an option later on, but we're definitely widening the 4 to 6 to accommodate that wider sidewalk because of classification. And there's another location farther north, and you can't see in this figure, but if you're familiar with the area, there's a softball field farther to the north near 520. A lot of people cross from low-income housing over Fiske to the baseball fields. There's a WIC check location. There's also the SCAT hub. There's a lot of pedestrian activity going on there, so we're recommending to add a pedestrian refuge island there. Not a crosswalk with RFBs yet, because we first want to build it and see if people use it, because it is farther from the 520, so we don't know where they're exactly going to be using it. Plus, I know the city and county are still looking at redeveloping that softball field. But we're adding this as the first step and then looking at future options and saying, okay, what can we add on later on, and it'll be a continuous process. Oh, there's an example of Barbara Jenkins. So you see the sidewalk on the northwest side of this aerial. We're proposing it at Barbara Jenkins because the west side of the roadway will be an exit only, so you don't have to worry about people making that left-hand turn in. Here's a quick typical. Again, like I said, the bike lane will be 6 feet. In some locations, we'll go down to 5 just because of the curb, and you don't want to have the additional cost for curb relocation. So it's realistic that the bicyclists won't realize the difference between a 6-foot and a 5-foot bike lane. Here's Barton Boulevard. As I mentioned, we would add connectivity to the ADA accessible ramps with the boarding and lighting pad. But we are recommending this throughout the corridor to make sure it's safe for all users. Now, I do want to highlight there is one location where we have actually 2 sidewalks along Fiske today. There's that wide 7-foot sidewalk, and then right next to it's another 4-foot sidewalk right next to the roadway. Because you don't really want to maintain both, we're going to eliminate that 4-foot sidewalk and widen that, again, 7 feet to 10 feet for the trail, and keep that one only, because more kids are going to be using that anyways, and I don't want to have confusion. But if there's an ADA ramp or ADA a boarding and lighting pad, we'll make sure connectivity is available to the transit riders. So I mentioned that the southern section has open swales. The northern side is very flat. The roadway itself is very flat. It's not really an open swale. There's just utility strip where the grass and an open drainage on the top with an intake for the drainage. There's a lot to know what's going on in the area. We would recommend curb and gutter in underground drainage, but again, we don't know what the answer is. So the first step is to do that survey and figure out how we can do this, because with it being so flat, you might have to reconstruct that outside lane to a pitch to allow water to flow to those drains. And again, where do we go, where do we treat it, and so forth. So the proposed for the north section, the quote-unquote long-term desired list is to add curb and gutter, but again, it's a big question mark on the cost associated with it, because it can go very high if you don't know what's going on. Again, this is the ADA accessible improvements. This will be part of the 3R project, and adding the pavement marking crossings throughout the intersections. There's several signalized intersections along this corridor. Now come the fun part. As part of our meeting, again, there was 2 locations. Here are the 2, Roy Wall being farther south than Levitt Parkway. You can see here the offsets that currently exist today, and there were locations that were identified by the locals as concerns. They are, let's look at the history real quick. Planning study, Levitt Parkway did not meet signal warrant. It's an 8-step process, 8 warrants of seeing exactly if an intersection meets warrants to get a signal. Levitt Parkway did not meet it 2 years ago. Roy Wall was right over it. 2 years later, Roy Wall does meet it. Levitt, it could meet it today, tomorrow it may not. It's right on the border for the 8th hour. So it's very close. But the way the department evaluates these now, and it's a statewide policy, is that whenever you look at an existing intersection that meets the signal warrants, you have to meet a 3-step process for roundabout analysis as a potential alternative. First step for a roundabout is just a checklist. Does it meet this? What are the impacts? Blah, blah, blah. You meet the next step, that's when you get in the details. Are you affecting vertical structure? Are you affecting a right-of-way? What are your impacts? Does it fit? Operationally, does it help out? It's a much more detailed analysis to see is it a viable option? The step 3 is then, okay, what's the benefit to cost? What's the benefit of having a signal versus a roundabout, and what is the preferred option? As part of our project, as part of our checklist, it did meet the requirements for a roundabout, so we looked at a roundabout instead of a signal. But as Judy mentioned earlier, traffic ops, who ultimately makes decisions, is going to be coming back out here after school starts to reevaluate, because they're the ones that will need to be making that call. But we, at least from our point of view, said, from our preliminary assessment, the roundabouts do work, which I'll show you an example of how preliminary it would work, but they're going to be making that and coming back at a later date. The other intersection is Barnes Boulevard. I don't know if you guys are aware of the IOAR, the Interchange Operations and Analysis Report that was done for 95. But as part of that, there were some recommendations for that intersection at Barnes Boulevard. Barnes Boulevard itself created those dual lefts, both westbound and southbound. The Barnes Boulevard project would just be adding additional, making all legs dual left turn lanes. So you'll be adding it northbound dual lefts and also eastbound dual lefts. We talked about the TAC, CAC. It is a CIS corridor. Right now it's on the candidate list for the TPO. It's not fully funded yet, but I know there's opportunities. We're going to go back, and I know Georgiana's going to work with John Zelensky on potential SIS funds to make this and push this a little farther and a little quicker. So going into those two specific intersections I identified, I know when people hear the word roundabout, we have 6 studies in Brevard County. It's the same conversation that comes up. Viera roundabout.
Viera.
Everyone loves We all know the complaint
That was
comes.
a test, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've driven it multiple times. I know y'all have driven it multiple times. We hear about it a lot. Luckily, fortunate enough for this public meeting, like I said, we had 120 people. I'd say it was close to a 50-50 split about people that were for roundabouts and against roundabouts. The against roundabouts was all about Viera, a roundabout. The department did not do it. The TPO didn't do it. I've had numerous conversations with Bob Comm about exactly what comments he had. But we know that it's very large in a small area. Multiple lanes. You have a right lane bypass. You have 2 lanes that circle the entire inside. There's a lot going on. So people get confused very easily. Plus you have heavy movements on Stadium, on Wickham. Every leg is very heavy. These 2 locations, roundabouts work in the right condition with the right design. At these 2 locations, like I said, no matter if you have a signal or not, you have to realign the roadway. Both not impacting any vertical structure. So you keep Roy Wall here and you move the western side of the roadway and curve it up, which is owned by city land. Then you look at the northern section and there's a park on the east side of the corridor, again owned by the city, that you could realign Levitt Parkway to come into a plus intersection. We ran preliminary operation analysis. If you look at the figure, I'm sorry you can't read it as clearly, but we did a comparison between a signal and a roundabout. If you look at both Levitt and Roy Wall, the eastbound direction actually works at a level service E or a level service F for a signal. Operationally at a roundabout, it works better. Reason being is you can look at the geometry of this. You don't have the right lane bypass. You have a single lane on the north and south side of that roundabout. So when someone's making a left-hand turn, it's only one vehicle. They're only looking at one vehicle when they're entering that roundabout. So you're not seeing as many vehicles. You're not concerned about where are they going. You're not having to decide as much what's going on. It's a smaller diameter because there's less traffic. People come from Roy Wall. I know the medical center has been adding it there. I know the city's adding in some more residential neighborhood on the southeast corner of Roy Wall. The number of people there, which is there is a right turn lane there, if you will, but it's not a dedicated right. You're only entering that and then exiting and looking at so many spots. If you look traditionally at a signalized intersection, there's what we call conflict points, where people can have an accident. At a signalized intersection, there's 32 conflict points. At a roundabout, there's 8. Statistically done by FHWA as well as the department, it's a 90% reduction in fatalities, a 70% reduction in severity of crashes, and a 40% reduction in the number of cyclists and pedestrian crashes if you have a roundabout. It may sound like a lot, but if you look at how you enter a signal, there's no running red lights. You're slowing traffic down no matter what. Because again, if you design it right, they're slowing down. When they enter, you also are only doing a tap. More than likely, you're leaving that roundabout if you leave an accident after the cops come after you change insurance. If you're at an intersection, you have a T-bone, a side swipe, a left turn angle crash, you're probably there for a while and you're calling a tow truck. So there's numerous times, and I can, of course, explain a lot of statistics, but there are a lot of benefits to having a roundabout than a signal. But for our intent of this study is to evaluate it. It works. Now we're looking at the next step with traffic operations, the department looking at it in further detail.
Todd, I have a question.
Sure.
Mr. Price.
I was at that meeting that we had at the City Hall before 4th of July, and you said 50-50 of the 125 people there were for and 50 were against?
Approximately, give or
Really?
take. But we did receive quite a bit of good comments as well, and they were submitted comments through the paper.
They were? Okay. Because my number of people against it was a lot higher than what yours was.
You'll always hear those
Yeah,
against.
yeah.
They're louder.
You know,
Yeah.
personally, I have no problem with roundabouts. I mean, I've traveled in Europe with a lot of roundabouts, and the Northeast, there's a lot of roundabouts. And they're used to roundabouts, and they know how to use roundabouts. People in Florida, for some reason, are against roundabouts, especially in our area. What we're hearing from our residents, they don't want roundabouts. And actually, you got a letter from our city council
Yes, we did.
saying that we were not for these two roundabouts. I think if they're designed properly, they will probably work. I think you're right. And it's just a matter of you selling this to the public, and thank God this is a state road, not a city road.
You're welcome.
So you guys have to deal with that. A couple of other questions I have for you is, we have a golf course on Fiske Boulevard that's been around, just celebrated its 100 years in operation this past month. And I've mentioned it several times, but it's never shown up on any design about having the sidewalks in that area of the golf course at 8 feet. So the golf carts can ride the sidewalk and keep them off the road and keep them off the bike paths. If you have the right-of-way, why can't you make the sidewalks 8 feet in that area? There's like a block from St. Andrews all the way down to Barton. It's where our golf course community actually resides.
I would like to say we would love to be able to do that, but we don't build sidewalks for motorized vehicles.
Yeah.
That is one issue. And the other issue is if you look at the right-of-way specifically in the Barton area, there is a jag where sidewalk is actually along private property, especially along the west side of the roadway.
Yeah, I
That
didn't
does
think you
become
had the
one of the
right-of-way
biggest
for it anyway. And my other question are the open ditches on the south part. Are you going to close these? I realize nobody knows who owns them. We don't know who
Owning's
owns
one
them.
thing, maintaining another.
We maintain them only because we're trying to
Certain
protect.
areas.
We're trying to protect. Yes,
It depends
We're
on-
trying to protect our subdivisions there
Yep.
that are getting flooded. But
That's
we
gonna
don't.
be a
We
good-
still today don't know who owns them. Nobody knows who owns them.
That's going to be a good question to bring up when you meet with Secretary Shannon and we sort all this out.
Yeah.
But
To be determined, I guess.
as of this, we're not recommending closing it because we have the room. But again, we have to have the survey to see how they work and where they're flowing to. So there's still a lot of questions that we're trying, again, see the ownership, but also see how they work.
Okay. All right. So they will remain open at this time.
At this time, the southern section, yes, sir.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, too, we think there were 120-plus people at the public meeting, but the consensus was it was probably closer to 140, that several people weren't able to sign in because it was raining and they just came in. So it was very well attended, and we got a lot of really good feedback from the folks. And there was, of course, you're going to hear all the negatives. We heard a lot of positives throughout the whole corridor of what our plans were. And that's kind of my segue into the resurfacing project, number 2 bullet here. A lot of what we have proposed, we hope to incorporate into that 3R project. When we're looking at the sidewalk, the bicycle lanes, put those in, perhaps some of the raised medians, get some of those added into it. So there should be some improvements sooner than later. And that's going to start, what was it, 2020?
21.
Construction 2021.
2021, yes.
Design right coming out.
So that's pretty positive. And then, of course, the Barnes Boulevard intersection improvements, that's going to be a little bit later. That would be a separate project. Okay. And I think that's it.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any questions? I do have a sign-up sheet. Mr. Pat O'Neill.
If I could just make one call too.
Yes, sir.
The website at the bottom is where we put all the roll plots. If you want to put everything in detail, it's all available on that website.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Pat O'Neill, 1232 Primrose Place, Rockledge. I'm one of those with the local knowledge. I live 1 block north of Roywall Boulevard. Let me point out, I've got a couple pages, I'm not going to even refer to them. Between Barnes Boulevard and Eyster Boulevard, there are 34 roadway cuts to enter Fiske Boulevard, 34 in 2 miles. There's 1 pedestrian crossing, not traffic light, 1 pedestrian crossing in that 2-mile stretch. It's in front of the elementary school that he referred to. A roundabout, even, I'm not a big fan, promise. A roundabout at that intersection of either Roy Wall or Levitt's only going to help at that one intersection. There's 34 of them. Seems like we forgot the other 32. Since the last time I presented to this group on this very same topic, at the intersection of the street that I use to enter Fiske Boulevard, we've had a traffic fatality. So they may be going down, but not where I live. And that's what I see, is where I live. Brevard County, or the state of Florida, ranks number 2, or 1 in bicycle deaths. Brevard County ranks number 2 in bicycle deaths. I asked at the meeting at Rockledge City Hall, we build these great bike lanes. When you get to the roundabouts, I'm not seeing a bike lane. Oh, well, they go into the lane of traffic. My last life was that of a Florida Highway Patrol officer, trooper, corporal, sergeant, and lieutenant. I read traffic homicide investigations. Crashes in curves are frequent, especially when you have a faster moving vehicle and a slower moving vehicle. I asked, what are you planning on doing with the bicycles? Well, they'll merge into the traffic lane. If they can't see a bicycle straight in front of them when they're driving down the street, how are they going to see one in a curve when you're trying not to have contact with the car to the inside of you? I have great problems. There's no pedestrian crossings. It was suggested, well, we'll paint stripes across the street. Painted stripes has never stopped a car, ever. They might put a sign up, pedestrian crossing, but in the evening, rush hour, it's not going to happen. You're not going to get across those 2 lanes of traffic to that safe median strip. I urge DOT to reconsider. As the mayor said, the City of Rockledge City Council voted against this. The entire Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization Board unanimously endorsed the City of Rockledge's opposition. On the slide presentation, it said that they felt for the pulse of the community's preference. Wrote that down. The community preference is no roundabouts. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Okay, Ms. Moore.
Pat, that,
Yes.
I just want to clarify something real quick in response. The bike lanes that he's talking about, the bike has the option to enter the roundabout or enter the sidewalk. The bike lane ends there because of the confusion with the movement of traffic, the weaving and merging. So the bicycle can either enter as, which is state law, to enter the lane, or enter into a ramp that accesses the sidewalk to go around the roundabout. So they have an option. So I just want to make sure that's clear. I understand his concerns. I just want to make sure from the board's perspective that they do have the option. It's not they have to enter as a vehicle.
Okay. All right, Ms. Moore.
my comment is, Rockledge, I'm with you. This is a replay of several years ago when was sitting right here, where this discussion took place, and we all were not in favor of the roundabouts. And at that time, Rockledge gave us some very strong reasons why it would not work for them. And now all of a sudden, we're bringing this back to rehash this again. And why does the city not have strong enough opinions on this that they don't want it, that now it's coming back? I don't understand that. Does it do no good that we say, that as a board, we voted against it? And here we are back again with this. Somehow I am missing this along the way. I think one of the problems is, on this board, there are very few of us that have been serving since 2012 who have this knowledge, because every election, we change people on here. I think there's only 3 or 4 of us that have been on from 2012 and 2014 that have any of this background knowledge. So what we're doing is, we're rehashing this again for Rockledge, but in defense of our new people, they don't have a clue where we came from on this. So that's my 2 cents worth.
All right.
Betty, I want to know what you really think.
Do you really want to know? Well, let me tell you, Kurt.
We
Yeah,
have let
Mr.
it be
Price?
known, we have let it be known with the city how we feel about this. And like I said, I was at that meeting with 120 people, and I got a different feel from what they got about who was for it and who was against it. But you're right, I don't know. You know, we've made our opinion known as a city council, and as the residents have made their opinion known, and I think it's going to go forward. They're going to have roundabouts, and maybe they'll work, and maybe they won't.
Well, as I say, when Pat was sitting probably where you are right
Yep,
now.
Yep.
And representing the city of Rockledge, and he was very strong in his opinions, and we've all backed him, and here we are again. We're right back to the same place.
Yep. I
So
agree.
that's my point.
Hold on. Mr. Barfield.
Yeah, I was at that meeting when we
Yes.
when we voted unanimously to
That's right.
oppose this. And the point is this: they have to go through more stages. The state does, and we have to be involved in every one of those stages. Every one of those, we need to be there. We need to speak up, and we need to say this is what we believe it's not appropriate, and we need to be there. And that's a simple thing we can do. You know what? And it's amazing if you keep speaking loud enough, things usually happen.
And you can be assured we will be there.
I'll be there. Even in my other job, I'll be there.
All right, Judy?
I appreciate and I respect the city's position as well as the council's previous vote in regard to these roundabouts. It has been the department's policy, though, this is a state facility, that when we evaluate an intersection, as we brought out in our presentation, that we have to evaluate a roundabout before we evaluate a signalized intersection. And I encourage you, Mr. Barfield has brought that up, to, yes, be engaged, but it is a state facility, and this is our policy. So we have heard you, we have the letter of resolution, and we're moving forward with our evaluations. And whatever comes out of it will be traffic operations decision.
Thank you. All right, yeah, Mr. Holton.
Yes. I know earlier I was quoting a little bit tongue-in-cheek P.T. Barnum. His actual quote was, "Comfort is the enemy to progress." Tongue-in-cheek is we tend to resist change. Obviously, these things would be new, essentially, for our area. They've been around for many, many years in other parts of the world. I think we have to. It's difficult sometimes as elected officials because we listen so much to the public, and if the public resists that change, we hope that they don't change us in the next election by saying to them, well, let's look at whether or not something else works or not. And I'm listening to experts who have degrees and are engineers, and they're telling me things like 40–50% reduction in accidents and folks getting hurt. And those are statistics that I'm extremely interested in as a community leader. And what I think what we have here to a certain degree as well is we have a lot of folks that refer to the roundabout here in Vieira and apply that to what they believe a roundabout is. And so I think there may be a little bit of resistance to roundabouts because the public has a negative experience with this roundabout here, and to a certain degree, are we brave enough as elected officials to say there are other roundabouts that may work, or do we just simply fall to, okay, I understand you don't like roundabouts, so we're going to be against them. So I think we just have to be objective as community leaders as we deal with the experts when they're addressing these issues. And I have a lot of respect for especially Mr. O'Neill, who came up and he brought up some other points. Mr. O'Neill, I really appreciate you. You know that area, and so I have a lot of respect for you as well. So I just think that objectivity is extremely important, and Commissioner Barfield was saying that this is a process. And so as we evaluate each and every one of these, I just encourage everyone, including our residents, to be objective. That's all.
All right. Georgiana.
And I agree with you. But we appreciate our DOT partners. They did this study at the request of the city of Cocoa and the city of Rockledge. That's why we're here to begin with. However, if, depending on what the decision is by the city, that is what the TPO will support.
Absolutely.
And to my knowledge, these projects have to go on our priority list. And if the TPO doesn't support that, if council doesn't support it, then I'm not really sure how the department can fund it. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. All right. Next is 7D is the draft fiscal year 19 operating budget. That's going to be reported by Laura Carter.
Good afternoon. In respect of your time, mine is going to be quick, simple, and I'm just going to fly through these slides because it's a repeat of what I've presented to you, I think, twice already. Our operating budget is our second type of budget. In March and May, you adopted our Unified Planning Work Program. It takes that grant budget of projects and programs and puts them into a budget that you probably are used to seeing, which identifies as your expenditures by compensation, consultant services, et cetera. So given that, and you will also have an opportunity to approve this in September. So I'm not going to go into the detail. What I would offer is I will transmit this presentation to you. If there's any comments or questions, feel free to call me before September, and I can address those, and we can adopt this in September, which becomes effective October 1st. The only thing I'm going to highlight here is the fiscal year 19 budget is about $2.3 million. We have, as you see there on our federal side, planning funds, PL, our surface transportation, SU, and FTA funds are the majority of our funds. As in our policies, I'm going to just highlight super quick our use of our SU funds. They're there in the middle. Recurring projects are a collection of our traffic count program. We do website maintenance for the counts that are available online. Also, we have a crash database system online. And annually, we monitor, which is a requirement by the feds, a congestion management system, which is reflected in the State of the System report. You'll actually be receiving the 2017 report in September. And we have a numerous number of corridor planning studies that are non-recurring that are using our SU funds. We have a Sarno Corridor Road study, Banana River, we're going to have Minton Road starting next year. Bike Ped Master Plan is underway. As presented earlier, our long-range transportation plan. We anticipate in the next year conducting a school safeties analysis in Melbourne and Palm Bay, and we'll be wrapping up this year an 88 bus stop analysis, which will be presented in December. Other than that, I will answer any questions. This is just a visual of pie charts that everybody likes to see. Federal funds is our revenue. We spend most of our money on compensation and benefits and our consultant services. And I can come back in September for approval if you have any questions.
All right.
Hope that was
Any
quick
questions?
enough and didn't go flying too quick, but it's late.
Very good. All right, thank Laura. 7E, Georgiana.
Just one thing, we do not meet in August, so the next meeting is September 13th, and we're going to be here, same place, same time. On the front of the agenda, it says 3 p.m., but that's
Okay.
not correct. It's 1:30 p.m.
1:30?
So
Okay.
we apologize about that.
All right, thank you, Georgiana. Item 7F is Abby, I'm just kidding. Sorry about that. Abby. Got 80.
This is going to be really quick. I'm Abby Hemingway. I'm the Public Involvement Officer for the Space Coast TPO. And in your packet, you have the public engagement reports for the month of April and the month of May. And all the information is pretty self-explanatory. It's the same information that I capture each month. The only difference that I'll draw your attention to is that for the month of April, our social media analytics spiked quite a bit due to we had partnered with our consultant for the Sarno Road study, and it was the first time that we used consultant funds to do social media boosting. So it was really exciting for us to see kind of the return on investment, and what they did is we used part of that funding to put boosting money on the Sarno Road 3-day charrette events and for the survey. So on the front page of that, you can see some of the results from that survey, and our consultants will be back in December to give a report after we have another public meeting for that study. So if you have any questions?
All right.
feel free to
Any
ask.
questions for Abby? All right, seeing none, thank you, Abby. Very good job. 7G is the local government report. Georgiana.
You just have a notice to proceed for the advertisement of the Hopkins project in the city of Titusville.
Okay.
That's it.
All right, very good. 7I, regional, no.
7H.
7H. Sorry, Steve, I was, this is the multimodal agencies report.
Thank you. I'll be real quick. Canaveral Port Authority at their July meeting, June meeting, they approved to move forward with a feasibility study for the expansion of the Disney Cruise Terminal 8. They're looking at expanding. They put on a great 3rd of July fireworks show. A neat thing that they do that not many ports do. The Orlando Melbourne Airport Authority approved their final master plan and distributed their annual report. Their next meeting, there's some corrections to that. What's in your package is on July 27th, and there'll be one August 16th as well. Space Florida board met, and they're working on a new visitor complex entrance on Space Commerce Way. And so there'll be another access point that'll greatly help with launches and things of that nature with the crowds that they get out there. And they've gotten a commitment from a company to lease space along the shuttle landing facility prior to or after. That's been an asset that's been underutilized as of late, and so that's a good thing going on out there. We saw the big plans for the SpaceX expansion out there. That's exciting, and there is a Delta IV Heavy rocket going up July 31st at 10:04 a.m. and its mission is going to the sun. So that should be exciting.
That's interesting. Okay. Thank you, Stephen, for that good report.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
If I could just add to that, I'm sure many folks may have seen this morning, the launch complex, 17 towers were blown down.
Yeah.
It is a very fast track to clean that up as Moon Express has ready to move in. They gave a very good presentation at the last Space Club meeting, but they are very anxious to get started on there, which is a great opportunity. Obviously, they'll be hiring probably more people, and another space program is going into there as soon as they get that cleared out there.
That was exciting. Yeah, very good. 7I is the regional coordination report. Georgiana?
There are several regional meetings coming up. There's one tomorrow, the TVARTA and the MPO coordinating chairs meeting, which, by the way, lunch is going to be provided for the members that are
the one time I
that's
don't
right.
go.
You don't get
I have the
lunch.
League of Mayors, so I'll be up at KFC.
So I'll just let you look over this information when you have time.
Well, okay. All right, 7J, the Florida Department of Transportation report. And you're not Jana.
I am
Taylor.
not.
I know. This was a test, right? All right.
We've had some restructuring at the department. The liaisons have been reassigned, and Jana is now working with Vicki Weish, and they are with River to Sea and Ocala, Marion County. My name is Kayleen Hamilton, and I, along with Jamie Kersey, will be working now with Space Coast TPO. We're very excited to be here.
We're excited to have them. We now have 2 liaisons.
Yeah, so how do we rate?
We missed Jana, but we know that Kayleen and Jamie are going to do very well by us, so we appreciate that.
Wow, we get 2. Wow.
That's right.
So as far as
We're
money,
special.
well, I know we are, but as far as money, will we get double the money too? All right.
It takes 2 to keep us straight.
That's right. That's probably more like it.
I got two eyes looking now for you. So
Yeah, there'll be a total of 4 eyes now. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, so your report is in the packet, and I just wanted to bring your attention to a couple of public meetings coming up. Toward the end of this month, the first one, the information is also in your packet, is State Road 520, Merritt Island Causeway. There will be a public hearing on July 24th, starting at 5:30 p.m. There will be a presentation at 6 p.m., and that will happen at the Kiwanis Island Park Community Center in Merritt Island. The second one is A1A North Miramar Avenue. That's a public hearing on July 31st at 5:30 p.m. with a presentation at 6 p.m. And that's happening at the St. Mark's United Methodist Church in in the Atlantic.
Okay.
All right. And if there are any questions, I can take those.
All right, any questions? All right. Very good, thank you, and welcome. And 8 is adjourned. Does anybody have any other comments or concerns? Seeing none? It's 3:39. I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming out.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.